What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Taste Like Music. Joe here. It is again time for another episode of Discovering Bob Dylan with myself and my wonderful co-host Dylan Seavey. Joins me as always to instruct and teach me in the ways of Bob Dylan. Quick overview of what we've done so far. We are on Bringing It All Back Home. We have gone electric. This is his Bob Dylan's same thing. Bob Dylan's fifth studio album, his first with electric instrumentation, one that's been challenging for me for many years. I've been on record many times saying I didn't really like it. I have problems with the loss of the songs, et cetera, et cetera. We will see if I've learned, if I've gained any appreciation for the album, if I've grown as a person. I do know it is one of your favorites. There's a lot of pressure on me to get this one right, but talk a little bit about Bringing It All Back Home and what it means to you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want you to feel any unnecessary pressure, but a little pressure. I've got a lot of sentimental attachment to this record. Even though I was aware of Bob Dylan when I was younger, I knew I was named after him. I liked some stuff on the Basement tapes. This album was my real introduction to, the guy with this crazy, unique singing voice who writes all these mind-blowing lyrics, and I was instantly hooked, even as a 8, 9-year-old kid. Yeah, I don't know. I think for a while I considered this my favorite album of his because of that. And I'm not there with it anymore. Spoiler for if I ever do give a full ranking. But it's still extremely high up in my rankings. I think 6 of the 11 songs here probably rank among my 30 favorite Dylan songs. Probably 9 of them would have a good chance to crack my top 100. I think it's fascinating. We've had a lot of discourse on this show, and we've had some discourse on our Discord about Dylan the songwriter, Dylan the musician, and I guess what we didn't really touch on, obviously last episode we talked about the Byrds a bit, because now we're getting into the era of Mr. Tambourine Man and All I Really Want to Do and My Back Pages and so on and so forth. We touched on it being okay to have differing opinions on those things and whatnot, even though I'm on record, the Beatles are my favorite band ever. The Beatles are number one for me, even above Dylan. And I like the Byrds and all the bands from that era I love, or I at least have a healthy amount of respect for. But when we are now talking about electric Dylan, I don't even think of it as like the same thing almost, because Dylan going electric isn't the sign of him creating these big, lush, ornate arrangements necessarily. It's him moving in a different direction, expanding upon what he's done lyrically, and bringing in a bit of muscle to back that up. The focus is still on the storytelling, the imagery, the lyrics, much in the same way that I've seen people in the comments say, oh, no one can touch Dylan lyrically. It's like, well, I don't disagree with that, but at the same time, I don't think I would want John Lennon or Paul, even when John Lennon and Paul McCartney were like trying to be Dylan, songs like You Gotta Hide Your Love Away and stuff like that, like they're not really going full Dylan. They're taking a bit of his influence and doing their own thing with it. And much in that same way, I don't think I would want to hear Dylan's version of Sgt. Pepper or Pet Sounds or anything like that, just because like everyone has their strengths and not necessarily their weaknesses. I think Dylan could write great melodies, and Brian Wilson and John Lennon, Paul McCartney could write great lyrics, but it's all about like what is the combination that we need here, what is dynamic that we need to be reaching. Like if we understand exactly what we do best, putting that all together, what's the best product that we can put out. And I think with Dylan, understanding that he's going full force into, almost some like, we'll talk about it with some of these songs, but like almost some like proto hip hop vocal deliveries, like really laying into some of this imagery and this wordplay even more than he already has. What do I need to surround myself with to bolster that even more? And what I think he achieves on bringing it all back home with the band behind him is spectacular. Listening this last week, I I'm scared, not just because I know of your previous opinions on it, but we started off so strong. You had such an open mind, and I still do think you have an open mind, but I don't know. I feel like I'm sensing some pressure on your end that you don't want to lose this part of you that's always spoken out against Dylan a bit. You want to keep that cred, and I respect that. I really do, because I feel that way about some artists to some degree. But I also trust you that you are going into this with an open mind. So I'm scared to hear what you're about to tell me, but I'm ready.
I mean, that is tough. Being a Bob Dylan denier is like 50% of my musical, on any given day, what I think about and what makes me as a person is my relative dislike of Bob Dylan. So it is tough. It's tough to do this, but that's what we're here for. And I've always found this album difficult. Just I don't know if it's Bob Dylan so much as just in the past the genre of this electric blues, without real, there's some choruses. There's not a ton of choruses. There's not really any bridges. It always, I always said Bob Dylan was just way too repetitive for me. And I think I'm more open-minded now. And it definitely, I don't want to spill the beans, but I'm definitely more into this than I thought I was going to be, and than I was in the past. He moves away from the socially conscious protest style lyrics for the most part. I mean, there's some in there, but he's not like railing against capitalism so directly. Like I think, under subtext, it's all about capitalism, but there's more the surrealistic, there's more the stream of conscious stuff. And I got to give it to him because the cover, he's just effortlessly cool on that cover. It is a great cover. It's John Hammond's wife in there. There's just a cornucopia of hipster books and albums. There's the Impressions, Robert Johnson, Ravi Shankar, and Eric Van Schmidt, Francis Hardy. So he's kind of just like becoming the coolest dude. And he may have already been the coolest dude, but now he's just like really laying it on. He's like, these are the things that are cool, and I am in the center of all this coolness. And he's getting into beat poetry, and he's reading Ginsberg and Kerouac and everything. So he's basically, people call him the original punk, but I think he's the original hipster. And I don't mean that in a negative connotation either. He's just like so in tune with what's going on in America and culture and everything. And I think he really leans into that. And I think it really helps. Another side of Bob Dylan, I did not care for that much. And, I thought the lyrics were a little half-baked. And I think he basically solves all of the problems and all of the negative things I had to say about another side of Bob Dylan. He's now solved them. I've always liked Subterranean Homesick Blues. It's the stream of consciousness, and this is probably where the hip hop thing comes in, because he's not rapping, but he's like proto, just that rapid fire delivery. And I think it's a great performance. Probably my favorite vocal performance from Dylan up to this point. And it reminds me of like his punk blues a little bit of the first album. And that is where I don't want to give all the credit to the first album, but that sort of got me like ready for this kind of thing, because he brings that back in a certain way into his vocals and the spirit of the performances. Like I get that punk a little bit that I've been missing a bit in these last couple albums. So bringing that back really works. The speed, bringing in the electric instrumentation, I think really helps here. The full band just feels like it's like spurring him on, and just like he's gliding over it with these quick, agile lyrics. I like the instrumentation a lot. I think I may have sort of poo-pooed it in the past and sort of been like, okay, it's just repetitive, boring blues. But the band's pretty hot. The harmonic is really good. There's some really great electric leads throughout. Drums and bass, rudimentary, but I think they do the job. Man, I really do like this album now. We'll continue through the electric side. Yeah, somehow it just, I hate the word it clicked, but it kind of clicked. She Belongs to Me is good. It's not my favorite. I think it's a little too Bob Dylan-y. It ends a little abruptly. I must say, these 3 minute song lengths, 2.5 minute song lengths, really were like, is he really going to do this? But he does. And I think that helps too a little bit because it feels a little more urgent and a little less of, that sort of just like on and on and on. You get the quick changes. I think the melodies are stronger, et cetera, et cetera. Let's get to Maggie's Farm, because Maggie's Farm was always the one that threw me off, because I always liked Subterranean Homesick Blues. So I'd listen to the album, I'd put it on, and be like, oh, why don't I like this album? I love this song. And we get to Maggie's Farm. And my first taste of Maggie's Farm, of course, on the Rage Against the Machine cover album, Renegades, which I bought when it came out. I'm a big Rage Against the Machine fan. Zach De La Rocha, really just the rap metal Bob Dylan, if you think about it. Think about it. He's like the same thing. And I really like his version. I think it's Rage Against the Machine's version. And I'd listen to it, and I was like, okay, I got to check out the original. And when I would listen to the Bob Dylan one, I thought it was just too light. Like it has almost like this peppy lightheartedness in spite of the subject matter, which is really dark. And I thought, Dylan was a little buffoonish, and the song didn't have danger. It didn't have malice. And I liked the Rage Against the Machine version because it was just like full of menacing, just like, okay, something bad's gonna happen to this character on Maggie's Farm. Coming back to it, I like it now. I think it's good. It's still like a little too bright for me. But we got to remember, menace wouldn't be invented until the Rolling Stones, 1966 with Aftermath. So he doesn't know to put that menacing spirit in there. I do think it's a great song, though. I like the lyrics. I finally get it. I still probably like the Rage version better, but baby steps, right? Baby steps.
Baby steps.
Love Minus Zero, New Limits, great. I think Outlaw Blues is strong. I really took to the vocal performances this time. I really think that he's showing new ways of singing. His range is better. His tone is better. Just everything about his vocals I found to be much more pleasing this time, which is very good, very nuanced. And, you got Outlaw Blues, which is kind of that punk spirit again. On the Road Again, you got the Jack Kerouac stuff. Really like the harmonica. And, just the strong beats and the speed and the tempo and just everything works together, I think, now. Even Bob Dylan's 115th Dream, which is an electric version of Motorcycle Nightmare, kind of. But it sounds so much better with the electric instrumentation. Like, that is what was missing for me from another side of Bob Dylan. I get it here. It's works better here. The songs work better. His vocals work better. Just everything comes together, especially on side one. So electric side, real strong. I'm really digging the electric side here of bringing it all back home. So are you proud? I almost feel like I shouldn't, be liking it as much as I do. I feel a little guilty betraying my past self, but
no, look, I understand. For so long, when I was younger, I remember hearing so many of the Beach Boys hits, I Get Around and Fun, Fun, Fun. And like, even when I was younger, I was like, I don't like any of this. Like, and then, when I, was becoming a teenager and, we all need to have our edgy music opinions when we're teenagers. Like, oh, the Beach Boys suck. And I can't believe that anyone would put them in the same breath as the Beatles and Stones and everything like that. And Pet Sounds, I remember like once I started getting over that, I remember listening to Pet Sounds over and over again. And spoiler, even to this day, which is sacrilege to say on this channel, but like Pet Sounds to me is like the record where it's like I'm still waiting to have the experience with it that everyone else seems to, even though there are songs on it that I love. But like initially when that happened for me, it was like, well, that solves it. Like, I'm right, screw the Beach Boys. And then I remember like the first time that I started hearing stuff off of like Friends and Holland and Surf's Up and like some of that stuff. And I was like, oh no, I like this band now. Like, and like my whole identity has been shed. And to this day, I'm still not a massive Beach Boys fan, by any means, but I like them now more than I ever have. The more that I listen to them, the more I discover by them that I like. I certainly have all the respect in the world for so much of what they've accomplished, but like, yeah, it's a difficult feeling when you stake your personality on something, and then you realize that you have to kind of eat crow on it. So yes, I am proud of you, but I also sympathize with you, and I agree a lot of what you said. Really the only thing I disagree with you with is, I mean, Subterranean Homesick Blues and Maggie's Farm, lyrically, everything in those songs about dealing with societal expectations, the widening gap between the American counterculture and the older generations. Like, there's a lot of politicism in those songs, which is funny, for all the issues that some fans had at the time about him abandoning his political roots. I think you hear it a lot. Subterranean Homesick Blues for me is a top 30 Dylan song. It's such a jam. I think it's the perfect introduction to rock and roll Bob. It's got that Chuck Berry inspired groove, like it's, yeah, the proto hip hop delivery. There's this really raw, rickety drive that the band has going on through those two songs. You can tell that Bob's been listening to a lot of Paul Butterfield and John Mayall and those blues groups. And yeah, again, it's funny because up to this point, he's known as the folk singer, and his cultural impact is starting to be discussed alongside the Beatles and the Beach Boys, these rock and roll and pop groups. But, half of this record is based around his love of the blues, rooted in the blues. And he does an amazing job with that. I'm really happy that you gave a shout out to Outlaw Blues. I think that's a really underrated tune, super breakneck band performance on that one. And it's such a rave up on 115th Dream too. I agree. The superior sequel to Motorcycle Nightmare, the Dark Knight to Motorcycle Nightmares, Batman Begins, if you will. Maggie's Farm I do love. Maggie's Farm is not a top 30 Dylan song for me. Probably a top 100. I re-listened to the Rage Against the Machine version earlier, and I there's some Rage stuff I like, and actually in particular I really like the song Renegades, the cover they do of Renegades. I think their cover of Kick Out the Jams, the MC5 song, is great. I do. That is one song where I just don't buy Zach De La Rocha's "I ain't gonna what." It's so overdone, and I understand what you're saying. I do think there's a lot more attitude to Bob's vocals across the whole album, like you said. But in Maggie's Farm, yeah, he's not being as snarly as Zach is, but he puts his cigar out in your face just for kicks. There's a lot of attitude there that I really, really love. But that's all the electric, the rock and roll Bob. But I think the ballads on this album are equally responsible for so much of its greatness. I think that the band performances are super tasteful. on She Belongs to Me and Love Mine is Zero No Limit. Two of my absolute favorites. Gorgeous, just celebrations of love, really. I adore them. And then you've got the mostly acoustic second side of the record, which I'm interested to hear what you think. I mean, I think kicking it off with Mr. Tambourine Man, I mean, just such a psychedelic masterpiece. To dance beneath the diamond sky with one hand waving free, silhouetted by the sea, circled by the circus sands, with all memory and fate driven deep beneath the waves. Let me forget about today until tomorrow. Okay, so again, for me personally, what he does lyrically on songs like Mr. Tambourine Man is equal to what the Beach Boys and the Beatles are doing with these ornate soundscapes that they are throwing down. And we can, argue and debate the merits of what it means to be a songwriter. To call someone a great songwriter, does that mean lyrics first? Does it mean melody first? Does it mean music first, arrangement first? There's so much of what it can be. At the end of the day, ultimately, I think different songwriters are great for different reasons. I think the ways in which Dylan exceeds and really just rules over everyone as a lyricist, I get out of that song what I get out of listening to a song like Eleanor Rigby with, the strings and the whole arrangement of it, and any of the Beach Boys or the Beatles' best, musical moments. Dylan succeeds in the same way, but with his lyrics. And I can understand with this particular song why you and some other people might prefer the Byrds version, because their harmonies are as fantastic as they ever were on it. And McGuinn's 12 string is as strong as it ever was on it. For me, preferring Dylan's version isn't born out of any dislike for the Byrds at all, or their version. I personally feel more attachment, not just to, again, the full lyrical landscape, but there's such a sense of wonderment in the lyrics to Mr. Tambourine Man. And I really feel that deeply in Bob's vocal. I agree with you. I think this is his finest vocal album up to this point in his career. He is on the ballads, on the rockers, he is hitting everything he needs to hit. And I think it's absolutely masterful. And I really love, I think it's Bruce Langhorne doing the electric guitar work, kind of adding some extra textural feel to it. And I think for as joyous as Mr. Tambourine Man is, It's All Over Now, Baby Blue is as mournful. And I mean, maybe the grandest melody he's ever written, starting off in that super high, you must leave now, take what you need, you think will last, to eventually end up with, he understands his orphans with his gun. A huge range, beautiful melody, unbelievable lyrics, such an arresting end to the record. And sandwiched in between them are just some of the most virtuosic lyrical exercises, Gates of Eden, and especially It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding. It's so evocative. I mean, it's All Right, Ma, I think is still one of the most quotable songs in his catalog. He not busy being born is busy dying. Even the president of the United States sometimes must have to stand naked. And similar to Subterranean Homesick Blues, like once he starts going, darkness at the break of noon, shadows even the silver spoon, like he's just going and going and going. And it's 7.5 minutes long, but he never lets up. That guitar figure is so breakneck. I agree with you 100%. He's reaching back to that punk rock energy of that first record, and you hear it on Subterranean Homesick Blues, and you equally hear it on It's All Right, Ma. This amazing criticism of American consumerism, political hypocrisy. It's as relevant today as it ever was. Man, I love this album. I really love this album, and I'm happy. I'm sure it's, it's still not going to be at the top of your list either. But I'm happy that you're coming around to it, and I am interested to hear kind of what you think about some of these other songs too, the more acoustic ones.
Yeah, I mean, it might be at the top of my Bob Dylan list when they finally do it, because I do think it's great. The one thing, and you spoke so eloquently and lovely about the only song that I don't particularly care for on the whole album, which is Mr. Tambourine Man. And it's not just because the Byrds do a perfected, in my mind, version. You get past like that punk spirit and the blues and this hot band, and it kind of the brakes just get thrown on so hard. Dylan singing in this sort of like stuffy, like almost silly, nasally vocal to me. As much as I liked his vocal on everything else, he changes it up a little too much, and it's sort of like that prototypical Bob Dylan sounding vocal that I don't like as much. You lose some of the spirit. I think the words are very impressive. It's a good song, but I think the chorus is a little silly, and it's just not my favorite version of it. It's never going to be at the top of my list of Dylan songs.
Were you about to quote whoever it was who said you can't play a song on a tambourine? What does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. That's damn true.
Yeah, throw
Although
it garbage.
I did purchase this book, uh, reading accompaniment as we go through the albums. So
Look
I
at
am learning
you.
some fun facts about it. And apparently he was inspired by somebody somewhere, and he was playing a tambourine with his foot and some other instrument. So you can be a tambourine man and play a tune. So not necessarily true, but I still don't love that song.
That is
But
fair.
it's not like an
You
album.
are allowed to feel that way.
Yeah. I had to have one thing that kind of ruins it, but it doesn't really even ruin it, because I think Gates of Eden extremely strong. I love the Gates of Paradise, William Blake's poem, inspired lyrics. It was recorded in one take, which I learned from this book. One take, very nice, very impressive there.
And you'll
Um,
also learn when we eventually go through the entirety of the bootleg series. I think it's either volume 12 or 13, The Cutting Edge, which is every single take of every single song from the Electric trilogy. And we'll go track by track.
can't wait.
We will
Can't
do.
wait. My dream. Um, but I mean, Gates of Eden, I think, is a good, not only lyrically strong, but these melodies are much stronger. I mean, it almost sounds like a pop song with this, ridiculous surrealistic lyrics. So that's impressive to me. I think It's All Right, Mom, Only Bleeding is fantastic. I love that, that hypnotic, strong guitar riff. And I really like his tone here, even though it's not, it barely changes throughout. It's very like straight and hypnotic, and just sort of like you're drawn into it. He's almost just talking through it, but I think it's really effective. It's 7.5 minutes long, but it doesn't feel like it's overlong and overstuffed. It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, extremely pretty, tender, just a really pretty song, great closer. I think I'm at 4.5 stars for this. I think it's definitely, I mean, by far my favorite that we've heard so far. I think everything that he does, everything that he's trying for, he succeeds. His lyrics are really strong. I think they're better and just more fleshed out, more mature, more poignant. There's a lot of deep, subtext and political commentary buried underneath. Having the hot band with him really helps as well. You get the folk stuff as well, though. I mean, you get both sides. You get both sides, not another side, but both sides of Bob Dylan here. And I think it's a very effective, good album. It charted pretty good too. It was number 6 on the Billboard 200. He had a top 40 or 50 hit with Subterranean Homesick Blues. So, I'm not the only one who was getting into Bob Dylan around this time, 50 years later or whatever. But I got there. Bringing it all back home. It clicked a little bit. We will see if the clicking continues, because we got another just critically acclaimed, beloved album coming up next in Highway 61 Revisited. And maybe that'll be a stumbling block for me. I'm not sure because I don't remember if he continues some of the same styling or if he gets a little even more long-winded on that one. That'll be an interesting list. I'm now scared of that one. I was scared of this one. That, you know, that disaster, that cataclysm has gone past, that storm. And now I'm a little afraid of Highway 61 Revisited.
Well, we know that there are at least two songs on it that you thoroughly enjoy. So that's that. Before we move on to it, two things. Firstly, 4.5 stars are going to make me cry. I mean, I was like, if Joe can get to 4 stars on this, I will be happy. View it as a victory. But I was also prepared for you not to get there because your opinions are valid. You're giving it such a fair shot. If you listen to this album and ultimately you still weren't digging it, as long as you gave it a fair shot, that's all I can ask for. But yeah, I'm almost emotional, Mr. Staggerwald. And
I was just gonna say it slots in right between Mr. Tambourine Man and Turn Turn Turn. So I'm gonna put it higher than Turn Turn Turn. It's still not to Mr. Tambourine Man levels for me, but
for 1965.
For 1965, it's a top. Oh, it could squeak into the top 5, but right now it's looking like it's 6 or 7.
That's fair, because I can't remember, was Beach Boys Today or Rubber Soul your number one?
Beach Boys Today was my number 1. Rubber Soul 2. Back in the, I don't even remember. This was when I just started with the channel and I'd heard like 8 albums in 1965. So Highway 51 Revisited actually made my top 5 back then, right. But it was out of like six albums. So
well, that's awesome. The other thing before we move on to Highway 61 that I want to bring up is we do, I believe, coming up Highway 61, we get our first bridge in a Bob Dylan song, which is fantastic. But for all this to, again, everything that goes into not just what makes a great songwriter, but again, like whatever we consider to make a great songwriter, because everyone has a different definition. But I do love in Gates of Eden, one of my favorite parts of that song is it starts off kind of with your standard major chord, suspended figure and whatnot. And then he comes in and immediately starts mixing these modes, where he's singing kind of minor bluesy of war and peace, the true just twist. And like, it does not go where you expect it to go. It's very subtly one of the most musically interesting songs that he's written melodically, and chord-wise up to that point. Chord-wise is the really scientific,
that's the official
scholarly term there. Yeah,
yes, in all my music books we talk about the chordiness of each song.
Yeah. Chordiness, I love it. So let's get into Highway 61 Revisited, and it's serious because now, as you can see, Joe and I have switched spots on the screen, which means that we were unable to contain our conversation to our allotted 40 minutes on Zoom. Honestly, not too much to say. I think going into this, just in terms of what I think you should listen for, I do think for 2 reasons you deserve to not be so afraid. Like you mentioned, I think that 2 things can be true. I think that we can be very, pleased and pleasantly surprised that we liked Bringing It All Back Home more than we thought we would. And we can still be looking ahead without fear to the next album because, like I said, we know it's got Like a Rolling Stone and Ballad of a Thin Man, 2 songs that you've expressed admiration for. Ballad of a Thin Man being the song in question where we get, lo and behold, a bridge, something that breaks the form. But also on top of that, I think that you deserve to be looking forward to this because even though I stand by what I've said about, not only that he's not trying to go for, what other bands are going for. I stand by the fact that he doesn't need to be going for what they're going for, because bands and artists are allowed to be different and achieving different things with their artistry and their songwriting. But with that being said, from a sonic perspective, as great and locked in as the band is on Bringing It All Back Home, I hear a step up in Highway 61 in terms of the sonic palette, both in the instruments being used, some of the parts that are being constructed, the arrangements around the songs. I will really try my best not to give away too much what I think of Highway 61 Revisited as a whole. I will save that for the next episode, but I think that you have a lot of reason. If it made your top 5 albums of 1965 in the before times when you were still, as dedicated to not liking Bob Dylan that much anyway, but this album was so good that you had to put it in your top 5, I think that you deserve to trust that. So I think you've got a lot to look forward to, and I'm really happy to hear that through these albums up till this point, this is album Bring It All Back Home is album number 5, right? So now we're going to number 6. Listening to them in order, you being able to call back to the records before it to say, hey, I can hear what he was doing here and how it's working here now, and how that is, helping your appreciation grow. I think you're in for more of that with this next record.
All right, that comforts me a little bit. For the record, I had this.
That sounded convincing. That sounded extremely. Yeah, I'm comforted.
Yeah, great. That sounds great. I'm really looking forward to it. Back when we started the channel and did 1965 Album of the Year, our very first episode of that series, we started in 1965. I had this one at an 8.5 out of 10, so 4 stars. And I remember enjoying it, but maybe not. I mean, I didn't love it. I do love like Rolling Stones, one of my favorite songs of all time. I think it's great. It's pretty much perfect. The rest, I don't really remember much else about the album, to be honest. So who the hell knows? Anything's possible at this point. Cats and dogs living together. So, but okay, I'm not scared. I'm not scared of Highway 61 Revisited. I think I'm, on the Dylan train a little bit here with Bringing It All Back Home. I expect similar quality. If I don't get it, I will be devastated and never trust you again on anything. So it's a lot of pressure on you this time. All right.
I mean, joke's on you for ever trusting me in the first place. Any positive results born out of you trusting me are purely coincidental.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I actually used that quote in my wedding vows too.
That's the best. That's a solid marriage right there, built on a rock. Well, the only other thing to mention, I guess, is between Bringing It All Back Home and Highway 61 Revisited was the big Judas incident, I believe. It might have been before. Was it before Bringing It All Back Home?
It was after.
It was after Highway.
Yeah, that was actually 1966.
Okay, wow. People just a big disconnect between time frames. The album's been out for whole years, and then people are like, what the hell is Dylan doing? He's getting electric. It's ridiculous. So okay, I'll do the Judas thing later. We're still cool then with Bob.
We're still pre-Judas right now.
Yeah, we're pre-Judas. I don't know. I mean, will these people not have radios? These damn hippies. I guess they were hippies and they probably didn't listen to a lot of radio. Otherwise, they would have heard like a Rolling Stone.
Well, like a Rolling Stone is certainly written in response to pushback that he was getting. The Judas incident is the easiest thing to point to, as sort of like a poster child for the Dylan electric backlash. But yeah, that did happen a year after he did. There's still, and it's important to remember too, the backlash was starting before he went electric. We were talking about that last episode. So Judas is really kind of like the culmination of a 2-year period of frustration amongst really pretentious Dylan fans, which is strange because Bob Dylan fans have never been pretentious.
No, it's
Ever.
weird how the pretentious old school folk fans didn't become pretentious electric fans, and there's no new generation of pretentious Dylan fans. And
Yeah.
I mean, look how thick this book is. Like, this is, I know he wrote a lot of songs, but I
But
mean,
my
damn,
God,
it's a big book. Big book.
well, we got a lot of albums to talk about. I'm really excited to talk about this next one.
I am as well. All right. Well, that's it for Bringing It All Back Home, a 4.5 star Bob Dylan album. Never thought I'd see the day. Praise be to our Lord and Savior, Bob Dylan. And that's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like it. If you didn't, like it anyway. Subscribe to the channel. We do other stuff. It's not just Bob Dylan 24/7, as much as Dylan, I'm sure, would enjoy that. Leave your thoughts on Bringing It All Back Home in the comments section. Leave your thoughts on the video, on me, on Dylan, whatever. Just leave them in the comment section. It helps the algorithm get this video out to a larger audience. And whatever else Jason always says, hit the bell for notifications. I don't even know what that means, but he says it, and it's provocative. You made
Gets
that
the people
joke.
going.
Check out Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram, all that good stuff. Links in our profile. And we will see you next time here on Taste Like Music.